members, let us remain upstanding for friends.
Yes, they really.
Like Master, that I know is friend.
Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake his thoughts, and their righteous man, his ways simple, and their righteous man is Lord. Let him return to the Lord, and he will have mercy and abundantly power. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are my ways nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. For as the rain comes down, and the snow from heaven, and do not return there, but water the earth, and make it bring forth bud, that it may give seed to the soil, and bread to the eater. So shall my word be that goes forth from my mouth. It shall not return to me void, but it shall accomplish what I please, and it shall prosper, and it shall stand. So you shall go out with joy, and be led out with peace. The mountains and the hills shall break forth in the city, and all the trees of the field shall cut their heads. Instead of thorns shall come out cypress trees, instead of briars shall come out the myrtle tree, and it shall be to the Lord for a day, for an everlasting fire that shall not be found. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for the grace that you will God continue to extend to us. You who created the heavens with your hand. You who divided the light and the darkness with your word. Lord, you who with your thumb shaped the peak of Mount Everest. You with your hands carved the canyon that is the Transportation Passage. You, O God, who placed the stars in the sky, God, and gave beauty to the sun. It is you, O Lord, we come before this morning, the maker of heaven and earth, the only true and living God. We ask that your grace, O God, be extended to every heart and every mind in this place. We ask, O God, that your will be done in this place. We ask, O God, that you bring wisdom, that you bring peace, you bring understanding in this place. We ask, O God, that every heart and mind here, O God, will surrender their thoughts to you. They will not lean unto their own understanding, but in all that they do and say, and all that they, O God, will propose, they will acknowledge you, so that you, O God, will give direction. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this wonderful day. We thank you for the blessings of rain last night, and we thank you, O God, for the joy of breeze and birds. We thank you, O God, for the laughter of children. We thank you, O God, for the wisdom of the youth. We thank you, O God, for the strength of the young. We ask, O God, that you be with us, be with us as we go into the weekend and indeed into this month of February. We ask, O God, that you will continue to lead your people, continue to lead this nation. And we ask that your blessings will continue to rest upon us as a people. In Jesus' mighty name we pray.
Now, as I indicated before, and as is expected of me, as Speaker, I will not be taking part in any partisan debate or anything like that. However, as Speaker and as a citizen of this country, I reserve the right to express myself on any burning issue, particularly if it's of a non-partisan nature that affects Greece, Turks, and the Caicos Islands. This is the only place I call home, and I have nowhere else to go to. Therefore, when I look at what is happening in this country under the octopus-like grab of the British administration, I come here this morning with a grieving heart and a troubled soul. I have already spoken out about the double standard and hypocrisy that is being practiced with regards to the special investigation and prosecution, and how one standard seems to be set for foreign whites and another for locals and black. This cries to the high heavens. I am pleased to see that a leading educator, journalist, trade unionist, political activist, Dr. Trevor Monroe, wrote a letter to the governor expressing the same sentiments. And this is a message, I think, that we should take to the world, Commonwealth heads of government to carry on, and then grow up with regards to the injustices that is being perpetrated against some of our people. Now, I hold no brief for anyone who may be in difficulties, and that is not what I am referring to. All I am saying, if justice is to be done, then it must appear to be done. And what is the appearance here, as I've said, is an uneven playing field. And then as we come to the vexing issue of value-added tax, I am reminded that Prime Minister Cameron, Minister Simmons, they receive a mandate from the British people. Our Premier, our leader of the opposition and others received a mandate from the people of the Turks and Caicos Islands. I note with interest that the Premier in London intends to have a referendum with regards to their role in the European Union, and they will do what is in the interest of Britain. In fact, that's what they have been doing, not participating in the euro. And so, it is incumbent upon those of us, or should I say those of you, whom the public have entrusted to represent them, to express your views and take the appropriate action the strongest possible manner, and send a message to London that this is not the way things should go. In one breath, they speak about partnership, but partnership should not be mistaken for dictatorship. Honorable members, as I first said, I am really troubled at what I see is going on. And the other day, as I reflected on these islands and what's them on a thing at the airport, and I was playing this gospel song, Right Out of the Storm. And believe you me, we are going through some storms, and there are many more ahead. But we have to trust in God. And we have to hang together as a people. I would have been happier if I saw the gallery filled today, an expression of people's power, that we send the message loud and clear. But alas, let me get on to the rest of the agenda. Under item 6, as I take it, there is no message from His Excellency the Governor, no petitions or papers. So then, item 6. Please.
Mr. Speaker, would I like to make a motion? Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a motion for the suspension of standing order 2248 to allow for the sitting of this House of Assembly short of the required period of 7 days notice in the city. Do I have a second?
Thank you. Move to second, all in favor? Aye. Any against? Carries.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to also move that standing order 20, subsection 3, to allow for the private members' motion and bill to be debated prior to the time for question and answer, or prior to 2 p.m. If the line for. Do I have a second?
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Any against? Ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I also move the suspension of standing order 62, subsection 5, which provides for a private member's bill to be decided prior to being entertained in this House of Assembly. Do I have a second?
Motion moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Any against? Ayes have it. Motion carries.
Mr. Speaker, I also move for the suspension of standing order 41, subsection 5, to allow the second reading, the third reading of the private member's bill, into our House today. Do I have a second?
Motion moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Those against? Ayes have it. Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Move on to item 6. Government notices, statement of government principles. I believe the honorable acting Attorney General has carried that for my consent to the Premier.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I've been made aware that the statement of governance principles, even though debated or discussed and approved in cabinet, however, provisions are made for in the Constitution that such statement receives the comment of the legal opposition. And Mr. Speaker, to my knowledge, such comments have not yet been received. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, this particular statement of governance principles should not be entertained here today, and I move that this statement of governance principles be referred for a subsequent meeting of the House.
Mr. Speaker, I second.
Is that the feeling of all members? That's moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Against? Ayes have it. Forward to the next meeting. Then we move on to item 7, private members' notices.
Mr. Speaker, in looking at the order paper, it has number 7, and I'm not sure whether or not we must take the 2 items in the order which is presented. So I'm asking for clarity here on the number 7.
Well, generally, we proceed according to the order paper as laid out. But if
Mr. Speaker, I would like to move.
Mr. Speaker, when the assistant
The case in the board paper that the it seems to be an oversight in that the appeal bill, the appeal bill is for private disposal. However, when you turn the page to page 3, it refers to the first reading, and so second reading. So here, that on the first page, where the private member notice, i.e. the TCI regular tax appeal bill, where that appears on page 2, that is actually the error. And where it is on the different heading on the other page, appears to be more blunt.
Well, one second, sir. Get back to you. Very much. I'll entertain a comment from the third
Thank you.
highlight that. Well,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If you get a ruling that with adhere to standing orders.
Some AC or something making noise. That
That
feedback. Feedback is just that's easy. That noise, that's easy.
Under the
It's black.
thank you much. I mean, I don't want to be semantical at all, but I take it that the members will be giving notice of the bill that will come later on. So materially, we would be really dealing with the motion before we get to the actual debate. Is that an understanding of the members?
Yes, that is correct.
I think I agree with that. The publication is really just for the members to get notice. This item, I'm not going to comment on the result, but we need to show you on the place.
Okay, thanks very much. I just hope everyone is satisfied with that. So let's move on then with the notice here. Those are the member for Southgate, this was notice.
Introduction of the value added tax ordinance 2012. Ordinance to review the value added tax ordinance 2012.
Right. Thank you much. The next item then is the private members motion 1 of 2013.
I suppose private resolution 1/2013. Whereas the interim administration announced in April 2010 its decision to introduce value-added tax. And whereas the governor made a decision to sign the bill into law on July 19, 2012, despite the division in its advisory bodies. And whereas there has been a consistent and strong opposition to the implementation of VAT since its announcement. And whereas both political parties ran on an anti-VAT platform. And whereas the road report commissioned by the interim administration speaks to the trust and entities enjoying strong revenues from its existing tax system. And whereas the appropriations committee met in public and the lack of preparedness for the implementation of that on the part of PCIG was evident. And whereas it is the express view of the majority of the House, honorable members of the Assembly, that that is detrimental and not suited for the economy of state values. And whereas this House Assembly, honorable House Assembly bases its position on expert opinion, examples from around the world, and local knowledge and experience, be it resolved that this honorable House agrees to repeal the value-added tax ordinance 2012 to come into effect April 1st, 2013. Do I have a second?
Motion moved, motion moved and seconded. Contributions?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let us establish some facts very early before I make my contribution. In April 2010, there was an announcement to introduce that. Mr. Speaker, at that time, I was a member of the Governor's Consultative Forum and was informed that that was in fact a possibility. In my role there, I never met with any consultants who prepared any of the reports that the interim government relied on to implement that. And up to May 2012, when my role ended in the forum had not received any presentation or details, to my knowledge, of any education on that. At least I was not invited to any sessions, and neither were 6 others of my colleagues. Mr. Speaker, even in the Governor's Forum, the dialogue did not continue. The green and the white paper came, disparities along with it, and a semblance of consultations began. Mr. Speaker, as a member of the forum, I never enjoyed a session on these documents, and in fact, in an effort to hear more about that, I responded to an invitation sent to the Kiwanis Club to attend a consultation meeting for civic clubs that was held at my church in Grand Turk. I was a part of 6 persons that attended, and I quickly left when I realized that the deal was done, and members of the team stated that there was only a consultation on such, on the last few items or 2 or so paragraphs at the end of the paper. Mr. Speaker, to me this was a nonsense. The anti-black campaign began when persons realized that there was no real consultation, and this system was already decided upon, and many who knew the pitfalls of the system, the possible impact on businesses and consumers, began to react and react publicly. Some people tried to take people's notice, but Mr. Speaker, I stand on conviction on this issue, and I frankly don't care what is motivating anyone right now to stand with me and others to fight on this issue. Mr. Speaker, that became a major issue, and despite the widespread opposition and the calls to slow down and let us talk about it, the government in July last year passed that bill into law. By this time, the forum had lost 6 of its members with 1 termination and 4 resignations, 5 resignations. The governor never replaced these positions for wider consultation and proceeded with a third of its possible membership vacant. Mr. Speaker, there was a scandal even around the debate in the forum as much as the debate seemed confused and misled. The vote in the end resulted in 5 yes and 5 abstentions, a clear divide, and in the advisory council, in absence of 5 members, stories of members resigning, vote issue was very telling. The governor's spokesperson was forced to respond to criticism of the part of the advisory council with more than 3/4 of his members absent. And I quote him, he said, "We do not need a quorum to pass the that bill." Mr. Speaker, this was the time for the governor to step back again and take note that something was inherently wrong. Mr. Speaker, the governor himself was forced to pass this bill at his own discretion. Whilst everyone was advisory, there was a clear message that this nation was divided on this issue and overwhelmingly leaned towards opposing the implementation of that. Mr. Speaker, my party came out strong on this issue, and like the PNP, we ran on an anti-black campaign, pledging to work together with the party opposite to address this issue if needs be. We were informed by Minister Simmons in what we thought to be a breath of fresh air that that was a matter for the government of the Turks and Caicos Islands. Mr. Speaker, the long and short of it is many chapters have been met, and the end result of a government's request to delay its imposition has been rejected. The minister, the governor, and the CFO remain firm in their stance, and we see to this day no real evidence-based studies to support this model or its introduction in any form, nor any evidence-based projections as to revenue it will raise, and evidence to suggest that the new services sector now being taxed will yield at least the difference in the shortfall in fees due to the reduction in customs rates. Mr. Speaker, I genuinely feel that we are shooting in the dark, and this level of uncertainty drives and guides my thoughts. Mr. Speaker, it is the same feeling I had when AHIP was introduced, and when customs tariff was toyed with, and the CPF was introduced. We will all remember that both rates have been increased because they did not yield what was expected in revenues. Mr. Speaker, to this day, I'm not sure that the interim government had sound evidence and studies to determine that this rate would even be sufficient. And I really believe that the authority to change an intimate part of our country should be vested in an elected government, and not in a period without elected representatives, and certainly not without proper dialogue and investigations, which by this time seem apparent. To speak, I can say that I believe that this day they have come. And yet, I am disappointed that we are here. November 9, 2012 brought the return to elected government in this country after a partial suspension of the country's constitution. I will not go into the term of the interim administration, only to say, as the governor reminded us yesterday, that I believe that the interim government did some good and did save this country from bankruptcy with its guarantee and relaxing of borrowing guidelines. Though I have some ideas on repayment and shared responsibility between TCID and HMG. With that said, I go on as a Turks and Caicos Island believe that we must do everything we can to honor our financial obligations and ensure that we position this country for growth and development. This means, Mr. Speaker, that we must become innovative and must consider all possibilities carefully, as I believe that we can no longer mark time on the spot, but we must aggressively seek to attract new and fresh ways through inward investment, expansion of existing industries, and the encouragement of new ones. This calls for progressive, visionary, and strong government, Mr. Speaker. This country deserves and cannot afford anything less. What we also cannot afford is any costly and timely mistakes in such a grave era of uncertainty. Mr. Speaker, that can be a costly experiment. All of us in this honorable house that offered ourselves as candidates in the last election fought hard fights on the campaign. And this was endured so that we can represent our people in the time that they need to feel that they have an elected voice, a real voice. Mr. Speaker, I for one believe that I was elected to represent every Turks and Caicos Islander, every permanent resident, every working holder, and every resident and visitor to these shores. I think the election of November 9th afforded me and my honorable colleagues this. And Mr. Speaker, I stand here today on this basis. If I elect someone, I expect representation, especially on matters that will directly impact me, and even more so, it will impact me negatively. Likewise, Mr. Speaker, I hold myself accountable, just as I hold those two that I voted for. An elected voice must make a difference in a country. Mr. Speaker, a clear voice and resolution from the House of Assembly must be heard. I take note of the governor's statement, released which titled, partly, joint government with locally elected government. Mr. Speaker, this is telling. And yes, I do know that there is a shared responsibility. And no, I do not expect monies to be sent to CCIG without a measure of protection for the guarantor. Mr. Speaker, I do not expect that at all. But what I expect, as I have been saying for years, that this is no longer oversight. This is overkill. Mr. Speaker, what I expect is for democracy, when it is in the best interest of our people, to prevail. Yes, Mr. Speaker, there must be safeguards, necessary safeguards that ought to exist in a democracy. But this, Mr. Speaker, I am convinced it's not the case. Both men do political science campaign on an anti-VAT campaign. Mr. Speaker, my party has taken the time to study and work with advisors and prepare a detailed position paper. We stand on that position today. We take note of the CFO's response and say to this country, we can show you evidence. And I ask him to do likewise. Show us evidence to support your decision to implement that. Mr. Speaker, for the past years, we have seen persons travel to these islands and sometimes labeled as experts as they land on our airport. And I recall one day a perfect example come and what the local knowledge is while driving on Country and Rancher and watching the water splash into the road. You see, Mr. Speaker, an elderly gentleman of the Rancher community told me the story of the seawall. Experts from overseas came in and designed the seawall on Front Street. Against the local experts' suggestion to curve the steel so the water rolled onto and over back into the sea. The steel was placed erected, and after much money, the steel on a rock, the water on a rock face splashes over into the road and makes the road impassable on some days. The moral of the story, Mr. Speaker, is sometimes the expertise does lie with the local people. And local in the context that those who knows it, those who feels it, knows it. Mr. Speaker, there are 3 former chief ministers present in this House of Assembly today, and 2 former ministers of finance. In fact, Mr. Speaker, it was under one of them, the 103rd elected all-island member, that this country became the star of the Caribbean. Mr. Speaker, the very same revenue system that we enjoy today worked. And not only these honorable gentlemen can tell you that, but Professor Allen Rowe, whose report the interim government relied on heavily, said that as unconventional as the system is, it produced strong revenues. Mr. Speaker, this system calls for serious compliance and manpower to ensure compliance. But before the system was beefed up in recent years, it was attacked and deemed unworkable after many persons in the areas of compliance were sent home. Mr. Speaker, many millions of dollars remain on the streets to be collected. Mr. Speaker, the system did produce strong revenues. And I understand that there has been a strong management issue. And I say, Mr. Speaker, we have had it before. Professor Allen Rowe made several references to the period immediately before the interim government. When, and it began to speak the truth, when we knew that there was an unusual pattern of behavior which has led to our present financial situation. Without resting there, Mr. Speaker, no real attention was paid to the years where the system produced well and produced real surpluses. Mr. Speaker, we cannot allow our tax system to be changed in response to a period when we know that something was wrong. Mr. Speaker, we are in a different position. One that calls for great maturity in the handling of our finances, and one that calls for serious resources in compliance and serious efforts to diversify our economy. It is there that the answer lies, Mr. Speaker, and not in that. I believe that we can use the same members of staff recruited for that and allow them over the next 6 months to a year to police the existing system and watch the returns. I am convinced that this system can still work and yield strong revenues. Mr. Speaker, a recent study prepared by Professor Richard Teaser has been released in the public domain of the Turks and Caicos. And I am personally honored to have someone of this caliber offer an expert opinion on that in the TCI's context. Excerpts from his report appears in the latest edition of the TC Weekly News, and I commend the commissioners of this study and the Weekly News for publishing his work. Mr. Speaker, Richard Teaser is a senior lecturer in taxation in the Bournemouth University Business School in the UK. In addition, he is a fellow of the Adam Smith Institute in London and a member of the editorial advisory board of the journal Economic Affairs. He writes and speaks regularly on international taxation, particularly as it affects low-tax jurisdictions and international financial centers, and has been cited and published in 5 continents. His book, The Benefits of Tax Competition, is the leading work on the subject. He also advises on tax reform and acted as an expert advisor to the scrutiny panel of the states of Jersey during the recent fundamental reforms to Jersey's tax system. A qualified chartered accountant and a law graduate from Oxford University, he previously worked as a tax advisor in the Big Four accounting firm in London and for the major London City law firm. This report, Mr. Speaker, shows that that is not needed for the small economy. That is a complex tax and one that is not well suited to small island economies such as the PCI. The main findings of this report are as follows. Because VAT is charged on all or nearly all business transactions, but there is refunded to business customers, it is expected to be more administratively complex and expensive to operate than the simple targeted taxes that it will replace. Two, it will not tax any significant sectors of the TCI economy that are not already being taxed on their import duties or other existing taxes. Three, those sectors that are not currently taxed are either unsuited to a VAT or are largely business services. So any VAT collected from the sector will be largely refunded to its business customers. In conclusion, that does not appear to be suited to the TCI. It would be expected to increase administrative costs without spreading tax across any significant sectors that are currently untaxed. Mr. Speaker, there are certain factors of that is telling on research. The wisdom of our neighbors with similar economies not to introduce VAT should not be ignored. And the reasons why some introduced it and rolled it back is equally concerning and should be noted. Mr. Speaker, many countries have discovered that VAT produces less net revenues than expected due to the cost of pursuing evaders. Last year, Mr. Speaker, the UK itself had another crackdown on tax evaders. And in fact, restaurant owners were detained in that investigation. The UK has to create additional and special task force from time to time to crack down on VAT evaders. It is said that fraud is a lot easier to commit under a VAT system. It is more difficult to manipulate a VAT system to achieve societal goals, for example, home ownership and educational pursuits. Over time, VAT taxes widen the gap between the rich and the poor and middle class. And this is evident in those Caribbean countries where that has been implemented. Mr. Speaker, I am not convinced that the system designed as it is suitable for the TCI. The Miller report commissioned by the Foreign Commonwealth Office to look at revenue in the Cayman Islands had this to say about value-added tax. We also analyzed proposals for value-added tax or VAT for the Cayman Islands. After some research, we concluded that this form of tax likewise would harm the Cayman Islands and its people. A VAT is a tax on consumption, and therefore would reduce consumption of the tax services. There is no evidence of which we are aware that suggests the introduction of a VAT will actually increase the size of the economy. In Cayman Islands, a VAT were introduced with normal zero ratings, and exemptions were introduced as a replacement for other taxes. It will shift some of the revenue-raising base away from the financial services sector to the rest of the economy. It will take up what is important was. If that would cut into the amount of the average tourist spends, that money must be lost to tourism businesses, which account for some 500 million of Cayman GDP and account for some 5,000 jobs. There would be no magic increase in overall government revenues from that. Indeed, the tourism industry would be expected to argue for compensation, and that would not be done to us. The VAT would bring additional problems. When assessing the potential for introducing a VAT, it is necessary to consider the UK's compliance and collection experience based on official VAT theoretical tax liability. Applying such an estimated percentage loss of revenue to a Cayman VAT with a target of raising some 200 million to replace import duties of around 160 million results in a VAT gap loss of about 30 million. It can be seen from these broad estimates as an attempt to raise 15% more revenue through a VAT might actually result in raising no more than current import duties. In practice, revenues will likely be even lower because of the negative impact on the revenue base and the likely loss of employment in the tourism sector. And here we are. Introducing a VAT in the Cayman Islands would require the passage of a completely new law. This would expand government as additional parliamentary draftsmen, prosecuting lawyers, compliance officials, and collection staff would have to be added. A new VAT tribunal and court system would also be required. Political pressures to adopt different rates for different goods and services would lead to increased complexity and hence the need for even more civil service. In the recent report on the UK's offshore financial sectors, the following concerns were expressed over possible negative impacts of introducing a value-added tax. 1, inflation and competitiveness. 2, loss of revenue. 3, adverse effects on aggregate demand. 4, distributional effects on the cost of living, total employment and consumer surplus. And 5, administration cost increases. Finally, initiating a VAT typically requires 2 or more years of costly change, including time to obtain the support of business people and the population at large. Great difficulties have been encountered by smaller countries, and some have withdrawn their value-added tax systems. The current Circle 120 custom staff will have to be carrying on collecting import duties while trained on how to collect a VAT. Also, training of businesses, their accountants and advisors, plus political leaders will be required. It is a disruptive exercise for any country to undertake. For those reasons and more, we recommend that Cayman not introduce that. Mr. Speaker, perhaps not telling of the rush and poorly planned implementation of that is contained in the report of the Appropriations Committee, a meeting which was held in public. Mr. Speaker, I truly believe that this approach will truly harm the economy of these islands, and the risk not quantified appear great. The report speaks to the lack of readiness on the part of TCIG. The committee is convinced that the Ministry of Finance did not explore all the options that it could for the Turks and Caicos Islands. The committee further believes that the approach to implementation of VAT for April 1 is unrealistic and increases the probability of its failure on implementation, which will result in government's loss of revenue and an interruption in its cash flow. Mr. Speaker, the findings of the Appropriations Committee is damning. I believe that TCI's cash flow and possible credit for businesses with duty goods can result in an interrupted cash flow for TCIG. Mr. Speaker, there is no evidence of modeling or economic studies. Mr. Speaker, the consultative process. The committee is concerned that there is no evidence of a consultation process, of the government department that is central to the government structure. Department of Economic Planning and Statistics, Revenue Control Unit, and Customs Department. The VAT coordinator informed the committee that there was representation from these departments on a VAT steering committee, but also that there were no minutes yet. In the absence of minutes and the sole production of action points leaves no records of those departments' expert input into this exercise. Mr. Speaker, these bodies could have assisted greatly in identifying the strengths and weaknesses of the existing system. Mr. Speaker, the committee is extremely concerned that neither the PS Finance nor the VAT team was able to provide a budget for the implementation of that, though monies were being spent. The committee is even more concerned that there is no budget for the operation of that once implemented. What was also found is that in the 2012-2013 budget, there was not enough level of transparency, as should be on the costs associated with that. And the committee discourages this approach by the Ministry of Finance to not have prepared the costing of a budget for the implementation or the operation of a value-added tax system. There is no clear transparency in the budget as to what is being spent as to the implementation costs. And the committee must condemn, and this honorable House must condemn this behavior. Because we should be able to do that the Ministry of Finance ought to be leading the other Ministry of Finance. ought to be leading in strong fiscal management. Mr. Speaker, to this end, the committee believes that it has identified even the need for a supplemental request before the financial year ends, and it bases its findings on figures provided by the PS Finance. Mr. Speaker, the governor announced that he has signed a deal for a $500,000 software, with the first module being put in place in March and the final module in June. It leaves very little room and very little time, if any, for testing, because you have already registered persons before having a testing. It is against their own prediction that the registration drive will not be completed until June 28, 2013. And given the resistance from many of the business sector, many who perhaps were waited out over the last minute, there is likely to be a very heavy burden and potential loss of revenue. In fact, Mr. Speaker is enacted on April and proceed to repeal legislation in accordance to Section 112. Once they have repealed the legislation, those businesses that would have paid taxes under those laws will no longer have to do so under the section and may result in grave consequences for government's revenue for the country and for the unit. Mr. Speaker, the committee was also concerned that the level of staffing is inadequate for several reasons. The revenue control unit will become a black unit, and as a result of all their efforts are now directed towards the implementation of that. We believe, Mr. Speaker, this will negatively impact the final revenue outturn for 2012-2013. Mr. Speaker, the same staff is also required to carry along advisory visits, which the committee feels could have been better managed had they had elected to run multiple training sessions in general settings and allow the advisory visits to be clarification visits. Mr. Speaker, the committee believes that the public relations campaign failed. There are too many issues to be cleared up, and too much effort is being placed on confidentialities alone. The committee feels that the VAT team in this period leading up to April 1st, having the responsibility to carry out advisory visits, to conduct public relations, to assist with taking inventories of businesses, and also to collect existing taxes, could possibly be overloaded. And the PS Finance stated that the team is facing an uphill battle in the implementation of that. Mr. Speaker, the committee therefore believes that value-added tax should not be introduced April 1st. Let us hear the conclusion of the movement. The People's Democratic Movement takes the position that the consultation process was faulty and conclusions reached by the interim administration could not be adequately supported by feedback received from industry professionals with decades of doing business and working in the TCI. We cannot support the implementation of that for several reasons. Mr. Speaker, it will undoubtedly increase the cost of living in the Tri-State Area. With the implementation of that comes the increase in the price of all goods and services. Mr. Speaker, I am convinced that it will increase the tax burden on consumers. That will further increase the cost of living in an already expensive and overtaxed country. Mr. Speaker, we must become creative. There is only so much taxing a small pool can take. Our people cannot afford any further increases on a $5 per hour minimum wage, with NIB already coming out. Mr. Speaker, there seems to be a serious effort to drive our people into further poverty. There are too many that are already unemployed in this country, and we are still buckling under healthcare costs. Our people already can't afford the food at the prices they are now. There will be an increase in cost of essential services. That will increase the cost of education, medical services, and domestic financial services in the TCI. These services are categorized as exempt Therefore, providers are unable to charge. However, they will have to pay back on taxable purchases. This additional cost will then be passed on to the consumer, increasing the cost of the service. Mr. Speaker, we believe that VAT is a regressive tax that disproportionately disadvantages the poor. We believe there will be a negative impact on businesses not meeting the VAT threshold. There will be a significant number of businesses with turnover of less than 200,000. These businesses will not be required to register for VAT, but they will be required to pay input VAT on goods and services and expected to process on at higher prices. Mr. Speaker, we believe that there will be economic costs to small businesses that do not meet the VAT threshold, and they may eventually have to register for VAT in order to retain major clients and or remain competitive. Mr. Speaker, small businesses that are in the proposed VAT threshold range may have fixed or consistent operational expenses, such as payroll, rent, utilities, etc., that may result in a very small net profit or loss annually. Since that is expected to be paid based on invoices raised and not on collection, this could place an unnecessary burden on the cash flows of these businesses, which could eventually lead to their closure. Mr. Speaker, according to the VAT white paper, 11% VAT will be applied to all transactions when no stamp duty is applied. Outside the scope of the interim administration system. Such a dramatic change in our tax system should be the responsibility of an elected government with a mandate from its people. We believe, as one of our colleagues pointed, it is not so much a matter of that, but one of democracy. Governments are put in place to develop laws and policies that protect society and generations to come. And while we appreciate the need for government to ensure a steady stream of revenue to foster greater fiscal health and a sustainable economy for the country, there must be a less penalizing means to accomplish this goal. We have grown this economy, Mr. Speaker, and managed well under the existing tax regime, and I'm not convinced that our economy has outgrown this method. We certainly believe that an increase in resources and compliance will yield much. We understand the plight of the people and are careful to increase any further burden on an already heavy tax shrinking base. Our residents and citizens are still trying to recover from the effects of the recession. To implement a tax system that is particularly burdensome to the middle class and the poor will not alleviate poverty, but increase and create poverty. Governments have to reach a delicate balance between having a stable economy and imposing taxes that could result in contracting the economy. And in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, today is a historical day and a sad day for the people with an elected government. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to be a part of this day. We have all come together in such an important stance to stand on our convictions, beliefs, and well-placed expert advice from practitioners and world-leading gentlemen on tax. Mr. Speaker, I trust that this stance will achieve the desired outcome. But if not, I say to the government that the opposition believes that this is a disaster to avert, and we are committed for the long haul. We believe that this is an attack on democracy, and if we do not stand today, then we can expect many more days to come of fighting to have elected voices heard. This is not intended to be a bunch of heads. It should not, from me, not be met with that spirit. I am a taxpayer, and I am a resident in these islands. And while I stand for others, I stand for myself. Mr. Speaker, I believe that there must be a greater respect for local knowledge and authority. And I sincerely believe that we must try to engage. But when this fails, we must stand up and push until our elected voices are heard. Mr. Speaker, if we fail, then it is not the House of Assembly that fails. It is the United Kingdom that would have failed democracy. Mr. Speaker, we cannot move forward on confrontation and clashes with one another. It is really not in the best interest to move these islands forward. And I pray that the interim government will stop and hear the voice of elected men and women and allow an opportunity to increase in compliance on the existing measures and to review the healthcare system, which is one of our greatest challenges, alongside the repayment of the $260 million, and allow for real review of revenue streams by critical government departments and experts, this time from an inside-out approach. Mr. Speaker, I call on the government to hastily address the healthcare costs that is killing us, and to renegotiate the debt that will give this country breathing space to explore options to expand our economy. Mr. Speaker, why repeal? Repeal because the delay has already been rejected, and the allowance of the law to come into effect on April 1st in light of the slow registrations and the mounting challenges of the Ministry of Finance and the value of the decision that still rests with regards to matters that will impact government's revenue and cash flow. I believe it will be reckless to not fall back completely and take a more evidence-based approach to revenue measures for the tax payers. With that, Mr. Speaker, I say thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Leader of the Opposition. If I was in church, I would have said aloud, Amen. But since I'm not in church, I will invite comments from contributions from others.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to, first of all, join the leader of opposition. All of the comments. And so I will endeavor in my comments to not too much repeat what she has so eloquently said. But sometimes repetition is necessary and it's one of the art of learning. And I hope that the British administration will learn from repeating ourselves. That was so awful. But I'll also take my comments down the road of small ministries so that we can understand how value-added tax will indeed impact their lives here at First Speakers. Mr. Speaker, the motion here today is not just a matter of us rejecting the implementation of VAT. Mr. Speaker, this motion is a stance against the violation of the principles of democracy. Mr. Speaker, this stance here in this House today is about democracy. Mr. Speaker, as was said in the 1700s by the colonies in the U.S., there should be no taxation or representation. Mr. Speaker, that holds true even here today. Mr. Speaker, we, the elected members of this House, got here through the vote of the electorate who entrusted us with their confidence that we would act in the best interest of this country. Mr. Speaker, even the passage of the VAT ordinance at the level of the pseudo-democratic bodies of the Advisory Council and the Consultative Forum was indeed undemocratic, as it was not passed by the voting with majority of members, as was stated by the Leader of the Opposition earlier. After all, there is no need to have a majority as stated by the government. They were simply here to advise him, and he did not have to heed to their advice. Mr. Speaker, that is not effective of a democratic society. Mr. Speaker, we now find ourselves with an elected government with no help from the new administration. The people of these islands are now knowledgeable about the good and the overwhelming bad that VAT would have on the Turks and Caicos Islands, and the people of the Turks and Caicos Islands are screaming no to VAT. various prominent business groups, such as the Turks Speaker Island Business Council, the Resort Economic Council, the Chamber of Commerce, other numerous local businessmen, are also saying no to VAT. Mr. Speaker, the persons elected in general stand opposed to VAT. Mr. Speaker, we are all saying no to VAT. Mr. Speaker, we are all giving advice to the governor and the FCO that VAT is bad for Turks and Caicos. Mr. Speaker, but indeed this is another case where the governor nor the FCO will not take the advice of such persons and people elected by the people to represent them. Mr. Speaker, the question still remains, is this truly a democracy? Mr. Speaker, Mr. Simmons said that the matter of VAT was left to the elected government. But Mr. Speaker, since that statement was made, all actions of the governor and the FCO goes contrary to that statement. Mr. Speaker, it was stated that we, the elected government, have submitted no alternative revenue measures to the need. Mr. Speaker, here, this is quite the contrary. Mr. Speaker, the governor's view and the FCO's view of alternative measures are only tax such as VAT, property tax, income tax, or sales tax. As far as they're concerned, the method of raising revenue in this country that has been tried and proven today is not an alternative to VAT. So all of our suggestions and recommendations were rejected. Mr. Speaker, the government's fiscal position now and in the future, outlook without VAT is optimistic, very promising. Mr. Speaker, our current taxation system works. Mr. Speaker, the EU and the UK are seeking to broaden the so-called tax base in the form of so-called tax harmonization, which we know will not work in a small island jurisdiction like Turks and Caicos. Mr. Speaker, Turks and Caicos receive most of its revenue from import duties. Import duties is indeed the main revenue earner for Turks and Caicos government. Mr. Speaker, greater than 90% of goods are imported into this country. After that, there's very little value added to those goods. We are not manufacturers. We are not producers. And our compliance rate for import duties is among the highest of the revenue streams of government. So why try and tinker and change our taxation methods? Mr. Speaker, introducing VAT, we run the risk of diminishing the revenue to government. Mr. Speaker, VAT was cited as being revenue neutral. and is projected to bring in an extra $10 million. Conflicting statements, Mr. Speaker. Revenue neutral and still expected to bring in an extra $10 million on an ongoing basis. Mr. Speaker, the CFO is yet to show me or my Minister of Finance exactly where and how we arrived at $10 million. Where is it coming from? From which sectors? When you implement VAT, from which sectors is this $10 million coming from? It just goes to show it seems as if a figure was just picked out of a hat and applied to the books. And they are now holding us, the government, to try to match that $10 million with alternatives. And if we don't, we cannot do away with VAT. Mr. Speaker, VAT has been cited in many studies by many experts as being as a great revenue earner for government. But these are countries and large countries that have sophisticated systems and the structure to properly administer and manage such taxation. Turks and Caicos, we do not have such systems. The cost of implementation of VAT, the cost of administration of VAT by both the government and the businesses far exceed the proportion to which revenues will be generated by the government. And so I can cite that VAT is indeed an inefficient taxation method for government in Turks and Caicos. Mr. Speaker, we spoke earlier that VAT is not only about raising revenue for government. Government is not the economy. We need to look at what impact any taxation measure will have on the economy. It's not always about government and government revenue. And Mr. Speaker, we stand here today to tell you that VAT will indeed be detrimental to our economy. Government revenue is not the economy. The economy consists of all the players. And the main drivers of the economy, Mr. Speaker, are those persons in the low and medium income brackets, in small and medium-sized businesses, Mr. Speaker. Those are the main drivers of the economy. And I will show you that VAT will indeed be a killer tax for those group of individuals. Mr. Speaker, VAT is indeed a regressive method of taxation with potential negative impact. It indeed makes those persons who are poor and in the middle class poorer, and those persons who are rich and upper class richer. So it indeed widens the gap. Mr. Speaker, and I want to say this because we need to take a step back and look at what we as elected government want for Turks and Caicos. We campaign, and I'm sure both parties campaign on growing the middle class. That's why we spend billions of dollars educating our children and trying to grow the middle class so that our economy can grow, so that we have a very vibrant economy. But the implementation of VAT will indeed stifle any such initiative. Mr. Speaker, as a leader of opposition said earlier, VAT will indeed increase the cost of living. Mr. Speaker, any input tax, as well as those any additional costs in administration of the collection of VAT for government will be passed on to the consumers. Mr. Speaker, it is indeed the consumers who will be hurt most of all. Mr. Speaker, and when you look at the consumers, those persons who are poor, those persons who are in the middle class can least afford to pay VAT. They will indeed end up paying a greater percentage of their income in value-added tax compared to those persons who are wealthy. Mr. Speaker, they bring us to do a study to look at the expenditures of an average household consisting of one husband and wife, one parent working, and 2 kids, making less than $35,000 a year, less than $3,000 a month. Mr. Speaker, on average, such a household will pay in excess of $2,000 extra per year on just the purchase of food. That's in VAT. Mr. Speaker, if you take me, I will on average money don't eat out. I decide that I am not going to eat out at restaurants, Mr. Speaker, and I'm going to purchase all of my groceries. I will pay on average, Mr. Speaker, about $300. I will say, or less, or $250 a week. Mr. Speaker, and when you look at how much you would pay on that in VAT, so you're there paying in excess of $25 a week. Like you would know by removing the items that are so-called zero rated by exempt, which isn't much. Because one would think that a lot of the items that you go to the store, the average consumer go, are duty exempt items. They are not. So, Mr. Speaker, I want, and this is for the average man in the street to look at, you will be paying an extra, at least an extra $2,000 a year in taxes. And the poorer you are, the less able you are to afford it. Because that figure normally won't change much among the income brackets in terms of expenditure. So those who have more income will pay less of their income. Those who have less income will pay a greater percentage. And how will this impact our citizens? Mr. Speaker, if you are paying more of your disposable income in taxes, you are then less able to invest in yourself, in your family. You are less able to engage in business development. And Mr. Speaker, so we will never grow that middle class of Turks and Caicos that we would like to grow. Mr. Speaker, so this particular tax is a very bad tax at this point in time in our economy here in Turks and Caicos, or Turks and Caicos. Mr. Speaker, when we look at small and medium-sized businesses, Mr. Speaker, a lot of businesses around here fail simply because there's so much money out on the streets. they're unable to collect outstanding debt, just like the government. So one of the measures that we as a government need to do is to look at strategies to collect government revenues that are owing. And Mr. Speaker, when you look at the system where small and medium-sized businesses, the majority of them are going under because of the monies that are out on the streets. And so, if we have a system of VAT that is based on invoice as opposed to cash collected, then you are taking away money from businesses that they haven't even collected as yet, as a government. Mr. Speaker, and those businesses are going to go under. Because at the end of the day, government is coming to you for the money that you collected on their behalf. Not collected, the money that you have invoiced on their behalf, whether you collected or not. Mr. Speaker, so again we have a significant number of small and medium-sized businesses who cannot afford to go for 3 months, who don't have the cash flow, who have loans to pay, cannot afford, are going to go under. And Mr. Speaker, I am afraid to say that the majority of these businesses will be businesses owned by Turks and Caicos Islanders, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and I want to clarify this because a lot of people are saying that our anti-VAT campaign is because the foreign businesses are against it, and we are just ordering suit and we are being led by. No, Mr. Speaker, it's far from the truth. Actually, those persons who are lobbying the hardest are those persons who stand to lose the least, Mr. Speaker. Those persons, like the IGAs and the other big supermarkets, are the ones who could afford to go for months and months without collecting the monies on the street, and still can afford to pay government's VAT that is collected on, that is invoiced on the behalf. Our small supermarkets cannot afford it. And a lot of people may say, oh, small supermarkets will fall below the threshold. Mr. Speaker, that is far from it. If you see a supermarket out there, Mr. Speaker, it's most likely that supermarket is above that threshold of $200,000. And they will have to be required to be registered with VAT. Mr. Speaker, so we are therefore saying that this VAT method of taxation is indeed not the way to go. Mr. Speaker, because VAT, even though it is being cited as being a replacement tax, there is very little that it replaces. So in addition to paying VAT, and I would like for our regular citizens to put on their list of taxes that they have to pay every month, I would like for them to put VAT. Because they will make the mistake of not checking how much they pay in VAT. They will say how much they pay in NID. They will say how much they pay in NHID. But they don't calculate on a monthly basis how much they will pay in VAT. Check your invoices and do the math and add it up every month and see how much you end up paying in VAT that you never paid before. It did not replace your NID. It did not replace your NHID. It did not replace or will replace the bank tax. It's not going to replace your insurance tax. So, Mr. Speaker, we still have to pay all of those taxes. So, this harmonization of taxation is indeed not being accomplished through the introduction of VAT. So I would therefore say, let us strengthen, one, our compliance with regards to collection of government revenue. Let us, two, look at ways to diversify our economy and so that we can generate new methods and ways of raising revenue and grow this economy. Because growing the economy is the only way we will indeed lower the tax burden on the average person here in the Turks and Caicos Islands. Mr. Speaker, there have been many studies, or so-called studies, conducted on the when the new administration thought that VAT was going to be implemented, was embarked on the process of VAT in 2010. A lot of it was done in secret. And Mr. Speaker, only after they started to come out in public with the mandate to get the views of the public how to go about implementing VAT, not whether or not they want VAT. The consultation was on the implementation of VAT, not whether or not VAT is something that we should go with. The decision was already made that VAT will come. And there was no consultation on that whatsoever. They repeatedly went on the defensive and blamed the former PNP administration for the notion of trying to implement VAT. But Mr. Speaker, that was again far from the truth. The former PNP administration, like most countries, was asked by the European Union and the UK to look at additional taxation measures to go along the same principle of tax harmonization. So, there's nothing wrong with looking at something and studying it. I think any good government should look at different options and study different things, and you learn from them. And that was indeed what was done. No decision was made. No promotion was done by the government with regards to VAT that the government will implement. And so those statements were indeed inaccurate and far from the truth. Mr. Speaker, they again went on and went on with the implementation of VAT, even after the vast majority of the people of Turks and Caicos stated that they don't want VAT. Mr. Speaker, and even the minister, even after saying that VAT was left up to the government, decided that yes, you can make your own decision and you can look at alternatives. But at the same time, we're going to move full speed in implementing VAT by purchasing the necessary software, by recruiting the necessary staff. Mr. Speaker, I consider that a serious commitment to the implementation of VAT. And it's a reckless commitment, Mr. Speaker. And it shows gross disrespect for the elected government and for people, for persons elected by the people to represent them. Mr. Speaker, So I have no choice. In my government, I have no choice than to reject the implementation of VAT on April 1st. Mr. Speaker, and we are not alone in this rejection. Mr. Speaker, as I said, there are many studies that have been done. The Miller report, which the leader of opposition spoke to earlier, so I wouldn't go over those points, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, but even the IMF, the National Monetary Fund, stated that VAT may not be a good thing for small island states like Turks and Caicos. It is the Turks and Caicos, but for small island states. The high level imports. And I think that is us. The IMF that is so pro-VAT. Mr. Speaker, the report by Richard Thiel also stated and made similar comments that VAT is not a good thing for Turks and Caicos. And as the leader of the opposition stated, this is a man who knows the problem. He's a tax expert, Mr. Speaker. World-leading tax expert, Mr. Speaker. He is not like Professor Rowe, whose sphere of specialization is on the impact of mining in the developing world. Mr. Speaker, and his motive is not that of the CFO, which is the following instructions given. So, Mr. Speaker, likewise, I welcome the report that was tabled before us today as House of Assembly by the Appropriations Committee, looking into the issue of VAT and the implementation thereof. And welcome all the concerns, and which expose all the concerns that we have. So, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the people of the Turks and Caicos Islands, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of my government, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Progressive National Party, Mr. Speaker, I have no choice than to ask for this bill that we presented before the House here today, repeal bill, for this motion that we're debating now, to go forward, showing our objection and our rejection of value-added tax. The killer of our economy. Mr. Speaker, I hereby rest my comments on this issue.
Thank you very much. It's so nice to invite you to hear yourself and the lead of the opposition all singing from the same side. Are there any other contributions? I recognize the Congress appointed member.
Thank you. I worry a little bit about a simple repeal of the VAT offers. VAT is an acronym for value-added tax. Technically, we have a blank sheet of paper and a pencil, and I don't hear from the experts from overseas who understand that the way it's done in their countries. It's a very simple exercise to develop VAT whereby government revenues are stable or increased and cost of goods drops across the board 5%. The other goods that don't drop in price are the ones that are already zero duty and about to be zero rated. They don't change at all. But everything else can drop 5%. While we're in this debate, I scribbled a little math here. As an example, a vehicle lands at $25,000. The proposition in front of us is one of the few sensible parts of the scheme as programmed right now. Right now, that vehicle comes in, we pay duty on it, and I want to make 20% profit. By the time I pay duty, I'm charging $45,937 for that vehicle. Under the proposed VAT program, because VAT is not real money, it's not my money, so it's not part of the cost of goods. Duty is reduced by 15%. So I pay less duty, I pay the same amount of CPF, I take my 20% profit, and I sell the vehicle $700 cheaper. In the meantime, government paid $10,250 from duty on the first, on the current scheme, and would pay $12,048 under a VAT scheme. Government paid more, but the price of goods dropped. It's a mathematical function to make it work. It's not something that we should probably throw away. I absolutely agree that the VAT unit is not ready. The calculations they're using are faulty. What we should be doing is going back to the board and making it work for Turks and Caicos. We modeled it, we developed it. One of the members of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association who was here said that his country rejected VAT, not because they didn't like it, but because they didn't want EU VAT for the EU calculations. They didn't want someone in Brussels saying this is what we're going to do. But he did say to me, had he been given a blank page such as we had, he'd love to see it because they could design it to suit their own country, their own dynamics. And I believe we could do that, but we have to work towards it and make the effort to do it. It is doable. That would be a good tax if we develop the formula correctly. At the moment, we have a poor model, poorly presented, and not even ready to go. The delay to August might make some sense if the unit could become organized within that period of time and make some amendments. I don't think it's bad. I don't want to see us throw the baby out with the bathwater. But we could actually redesign it and make it work for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, honorable member, for your contribution. Are there any other contributions? Are there any other? I recognize the governor's appointed member, Repeal. Just use your microphone.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask one very simple, but what I consider to be a very dispositive question. But before I do that, I feel constrained to make 2 points of clarification. The Honorable Premier said in his remarks a short while ago that that was not legitimately enacted. In part, he said because it did not pass the consultative forum with a majority vote, and in that, Mr. Speaker, the Premier is wrong. That was passed with a majority vote, which means that the Premier is also wrong in saying that the governor ignored the advice of the members of the forum. Secondly, the Honorable Premier, Mr. Speaker, just decried the legal prerogative of the governor to ignore the advice of the consultative forum. And he has said it conceptually as if that prerogative was unconstitutional. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, one can be forgiven the inference that the Honorable Premier said, and one can be forgiven that he is not aware that our new Constitution, which gave rise to the elections, and this is why we are all here today, rests in the governor. Mr. Speaker, I could clarify a number of misrepresentations that the Honorable Premier made in his remarks, especially as it relates to that. And the points he made about the consultation process having been a part of the interim period and the interim administration over the last 2 years. However, Mr. Speaker, I don't see any merit in doing that. And having said that, Mr. Speaker, this is the question that I pose, and this is the question rather that I ask. Now, I am on record, Mr. Speaker, declaring my dismay throughout the entire 3 years of the interim administration about our local political leaders doing little more than misleading our people on promises of things that they had no authority or no power to do. Mr. Speaker, I sit here and it pains me really and truly to make the declaration that I am dismayed against this. The difference, Mr. Speaker, is that during the interim administration, our local politicians didn't have any authority and they didn't have any power. But today, they do. Which is why, Mr. Speaker, I again feel constrained to ask the Honorable Premier and the Honorable Leader of the Opposition what steps they have taken to assure our people that this exercise is not just another one in misleading political theatrics, but that they do, in fact, have the authority and power to effectuate the repeal. And so, Mr. Speaker, for the proper edification of our people, I would ask the Honorable Attorney General to follow the replies of both the Premier and the Honorable Leader of the Opposition with a brief explanation of the legal requirements and the challenges that we face today in attempting to repeal VAT ordinance. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member.
Are there any other contributions? I recognize the Honorable Minister for Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will support this resolution to repeal the value on the tax and stand in support of the comments made by the Honorable Leader of the Opposition and the Premier. Mr. Speaker, while I'm advocating on keeping the current regime, I acknowledge that it has come with an increased compliance effort to ensure a reduction in the government's inability to collect money due to them. Mr. Speaker, may I be able to say?
I know that you are not well,
Is that the voice?
but
Going
I
online.
cannot assist that voice, unfortunately.
Our apologies, Mr. Speaker. Okay, Mr. Speaker, the VAT debate has been going on for long enough, and as the Honorable Government Utility Member Premier has requested the legality in which we're here today to repeal the value-added tax ordinance, I must say that regardless of what legal allowance we are to appeal it, democracy must reign. We in the Turks and Caicos have started taking baby steps and emerging from our economic downturn. The implementation of value-added tax on April 1st is causing investment uncertainty. And the difficulty is that how are we to tax people when the economy is still in the situation it is today and unstable? I must look specifically at the education sector. Although items that parents, teachers, and staff of the education facilities would purchase, like books or food, would be tax exempt or VAT exempt, it's still placing a social and economic burden on the poor in the sense that regardless of how much money they're making per month, they're still paying out more on that than other members who are in the upper middle class, as example by the Premier earlier. We're not prepared for that. The VAT unit is not prepared. Their inability to actually explain how that will affect us day to day has been very clear in the various discussions, as well as in the Appropriations Committee report tabled before us today. The overall cost of education, which is my primary concern, will be affected because of that. It will be implemented on building materials, cost of labor, which will create an issue for us in developing and erecting new schools, refurbishing the old buildings, and other materials needed for our educational institutions. Our schools are inheriting an upgrade and improvement, and this will not be done prior to April 1st without being implemented. This would mean that the government's proposed plans for the infrastructure of schools will be threatened. The revenue will be easily undermined as contractors and other suppliers pass these costs on to the government and the public. This means that less money will be available for upgrades, scholarships, and other important priorities earmarked for the education sector by my government, as well as campaign by the opposition. Mr. Speaker, our children are our future and our most valuable asset. My government has put education as a priority, and we want to improve the infrastructure, introduce new programs, reduce overcrowding, which is the paramount concern at the moment, and create an educational system that is top line and produces world-class results. Mr. Speaker, I must support the motion to repeal VAT as a threatening to ruin my government's vision for the educational system and the young people of the Turks and Caicos.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. I think I want to explain for the benefit of our viewers, the public, unless some feel like I'm overlooking the standard of address here in the House. I have committed the member in her sleepless attire, primarily because of the operation she's had. And if she had to be fully covered, it would make her even more uncomfortable
said that your spirit is troubled. And so is mine. My spirit is troubled because the people of the Turks and Caicos Islands, when they elected us to support them and to represent them, she said, to the best of our ability. Instead, we are about to be introduced to this gigantic serpent called VAT. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support this motion. But more importantly, Mr. Speaker, I rise to support democracy in the Turks and Caicos Islands. According to Estamese, an Assisi and an African statesman and follower of Socrates, the defining characteristic of democracy is that it is ruled by laws, not by people. Dictatorships, Mr. Speaker, and contrasts ruled by an individual. The purpose of this House, Mr. Speaker, this House of Assembly, is to make laws. The Constitution of the Turks and Caicos Islands states its best. The legislature may make laws for the peace, order, and good government of the islands. The reason, Mr. Speaker, we have a Constitution is to set out in writing the rights of the citizens of the islands. They include the rights not to be discriminated against, the rights of freedom to worship, and the right to elect representatives, making the laws for the peace, order, and good governance of these islands. Mr. Speaker, I believe in the Constitution of the Turks and Caicos Islands. It is a document that protects the citizens of these islands from injustice and dictatorships. Mr. Speaker, the people of the Turks and Caicos Islands also believe in the Constitution. As you can see on November 9th, 90% of the eligible voters were prepared to stand in the cold, some 4 hours, some 5 hours, some 7 hours, to vote for their elected representatives. There are very few countries, Mr. Speaker, in the world that can match that level of participation. So, Mr. Speaker, the House of Assembly has the moral and constitutional authority to pass this law to repeal VAT. And we've had plenty of support. Our leader spoke about Mr. William Hague, the Secretary of State, who stated that powers are devolved to elected government. Mr. Simmons, the minister responsible for the Turks and Caicos Islands, in response to a parliamentary question, stated that the decision about VAT was one for the government of the Turks and Caicos Islands. Both the Secretary of State, Mr. Speaker, and Minister Simmons now seem to have added a caveat. It is your decision, as long as I agree. Mr. Speaker, this is the caveat of every dictator in the world. Speaker, I know you're well read, but I don't know if you heard this one, but King Charles I of England was happy for the Parliament to enact laws as long as they were his laws. And the fledgling U.S. Congress could make any laws they like as long as they paid the taxes decided in England. And we, in the House of Assembly of the Turks and Caicos Islands, can apparently transport any laws Minister Simmons agrees to. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask why we went through the whole election process, the whole end of the House, the swearing in, the symbolic names, the speaker in his way, the clocks and yield to the Queen. What is this, I ask myself? Mr. Speaker, was it merely a deception to fool the outside world that the UK has restored democracy? Well, I do not believe, Mr. Speaker, that the members of this honorable House should be caught in deception. I don't want to say this, but I think it's the right thing to say, Mr. Speaker. If we cannot pass laws to the self-governance of these islands, we should take the names and all the trappings of the power and privilege of this honorable House and bury them in that. Because democracy will be dead in this country, and all it requires is a decent hero. So I call Mr. Speaker on the Secretary of State and Minister Simmons to honor their commitment made to the UK Parliament and to the people of this country. I call on the governor and the CFO many times back to take a step back, take a deep breath, and recognize what damage their VAT campaign has done and continues to do to the standing of the UK representatives in these islands. Mr. Speaker, all of us said today, this is not a small number that said business and scaremongering. This is the whole country speaking with one united voice. The government, the opposition, the Chamber of Commerce, the Independent Business Council, the Association of Architects, and over 3,000 individuals who signed the petition. Mr. Speaker, the people have spoken, and we need to be heard. The arrogant dismissal, Mr. Speaker, of such a staggering opposition with such easy disdain has created a poisonous atmosphere that has degraded the standing of the UK intervention in the affairs of this country and panders to the most radical voices. Mr. Speaker, I do not believe this country is ready for independence, but I do believe, Mr. Speaker, we are not ready to see democracy in this country die. So, Mr. Speaker, I call on all residents of these islands to support this motion or this law, a legitimate law with the moral authority of a democratically elected government. Because in supporting this bill, we are supporting the rights of the Turks and Caicos Islanders to live in a democratic country. Mr. Speaker, I support this motion. Thank you.
Before I recognize the next speaker, let me thank you very much, Benji, for your contribution. And a great deal of what you said may very well be professional. I now recognize the honorable member for South.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker, honorable members. Today we are engaged in an exercise of tremendous importance. I would dare say of historic importance. This exercise is to repeal a bill which has been passed by the interim administration. And just from all accounts, the powers that be are hell bent on implementing it. This exercise has two implications. First, it seeks to repeal a bill passed by people who did not enjoy the mandate of the public. And they did so in defiance of the wishes of the public. We have already heard from previous speakers the objection by the community, the business community, the people, and every element in this country. And yet, the powers that be, those who were appointed by the governor, went ahead and passed it. And I wish to say at this juncture that no one here is in ignorance of what the law said then and what the law says now. We know that during the interim administration, the governor appointed an advisory council and an interim consultative forum. We know that whatever decisions were taken in either one of those bodies, the government could override it if they wanted to. We know that now, if this House passes a bill and the Foreign Office doesn't like it, it can withhold assets. We're not stupid. We understand who we are. But we have a duty, as has already been said, to do the will of the people. And God help me, I'm going to do the will of the people if I die here standing. Secondly, this exercise sends a strong message that the people of this country give no support to the implementation of this law. This is the strongest demonstration of democracy in action that we have seen in this country in many years. The government, members, the opposition, and everybody else stand united with one voice. Let me admit here that from what I have seen in the various pieces of text documents, it appears that we have had to raise additional revenue in order to sustain our economy, in order to provide the necessary funds that we need to provide a better way of life for our people.
Excuse me, Mr. Robinson, will the visitor in the gallery move his head here? Thank you. Continue, please.
But we cannot take away from the people the right to decide what is the best way to go about it, what is the best way to take their money from them in order to provide the quality of life that they demand and deserve. This is a fundamental principle of democracy. And to this date, that consultation, that listening to the people has been absent. We should not forget the Boston Tea Party. And I believe some reference has already been made to that in this House this morning. It has been represented to us that VAT is the panacea for all our tax problems and the solution to all of our revenue problems. And yet, as we read the plethora of reports and opinions on the subject, there is serious division in opinion and the effectiveness of its applicability in this territory. My honorable colleagues have gone into all the various statements to that effect, and I'm not going to follow this House with that at this time. It is a system, as I understand it, best suited to countries that have a significant input in the production of goods. For example, countries that have manufacturing and the rest of it. Countries like the Turks and Caicos Islands, Cayman Islands, Japan, on export duties and on tourism and the rest of it, it does not suit us. There are strong arguments by knowledgeable experts that VAT is not the best system for TCI. And these arguments have been ignored. That brings me to the heart of this exercise. I cannot understand in my widest imagination why the British government wishes to take the unprecedented step of ramming this tax system down our throats and against the will of the people. Is this method more important than the results of an exercise. I should say that I believe we need additional revenue. Going back on the point that the honorable governors made, that given the opportunity, this House can find the best ways of raising the additional revenue that we need. Many of us are convinced that the result is necessary for many good reasons. But the method has many drawbacks. Drawbacks too numerous and too obvious for us to get into. It is utterly reasonable, in my belief, to allow this House, led by the efforts of the government, to produce reasonable and effective additional revenue measures to raise the money that this country needs. Thereafter, a cleaner, easier, cheaper, smoother, comprehensive system with sustainable financial powers can be brought into operation. I submit, Mr. Speaker, that this is not beyond the scope of this House, guided by unbiased experts and the will of the TCIP. This is reasonable. This is right. This is fair. And this is democratic. Let us not forget that this country did not come to age until the British government decided to relax their strong-handed attitude and allow the elected government of this country to participate in development agreements, to craft it in a way that is best suited for the benefit of this country. Yes, some things have happened in the recent past that although we not feel too happy with what we hear, but we cannot continue to live in the fear of the recent past. Paranoia will get us nowhere. We need to submit to reason in order for us to move ahead. This is I wish to point out a little bit of history. Because prior to the Club-Med government, Club-Med agreement, every development agreement, I believe there are some of those on the other side who remember those days. Every development agreement under the new Executive Council had to be sent to London for ratification before the government was allowed to sign. And almost without exception, of those agreements came back. They came back with stringent clauses that the government could not abide by. And in fact, I was very relieved, saying that this is his money. He's got it, he wanted it, and he can go to many other places and get better concessions that he was getting. Fortunately, and by the grace of God, at the Club-Med agreement, the British government changed their attitude, and they allowed the elected government of this country to be involved in the process of drafting that agreement. And I know members of the PDM administration were involved. Personally, I made trips to London, to Paris, to New York, and to Miami, accompanied by all the ministers and by experts in this country and this government in order to move the Club-Med agreement forward. The British government, fortunately, took part. Was a part of that agreement. And all of us know what transpired or happened. From that day, the British government at the same time they withdrew from that process, and this country began to move forward to the point where we are today. I make that point to reinforce, to reinforce the point that the people of this country, this House, and given the opportunity, are allowed to use our talents and our ingenuity to do the things that are necessary in the best interest of the people, they can come to the right conclusion. They can find the ideal solution to the people's problems. The problem, too, is that any failures that is likely to arise as a result of the pressure of the British government and the defiance of the British government in implementing this tax. I want to make the point that it is not, the problems will not fall on the shoulders of the British people. The problems will not fall on the shoulders of the British government. It will be the people of the Turks and Caicos Islands who will have to shoulder that responsibility. History will show, and I've said this on many occasions, that the fact that we had to borrow $260 million to get this country out of where it was. Had they listened to the people, it would have been less than half of that. So we cannot allow the mistakes of people who have not been elected to create extra expense and extra blood on the shoulders of Turks and Caicos people. So as I stand here this morning, I am pleading to the powers that be, the governor, the Secretary of State in England, to refrain, to withdraw their hand for what is happening here. Allow this country, allow the people who have been elected by and on behalf of the people to do what seems right in the best interest of the country. We understand the British government, the Secretary of State, will not listen to what we say today, and will request the governor to go ahead and do everything they want to do with that. We are saying, by the grace of God, that is the wrong step to take, to withdraw from them. Allow us to do what is right, what we've been elected to do. And it is my conviction that if we are allowed the chance to find the solution to our problems, we can do it. If a man and woman in this house this morning will sit down and find the solution, we need the time. And we're asking those that have the power to do it not to impose on us a situation that is going to follow, create hardships, create unnecessary burdens. That is all I ask. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member.
So, Section 19 on personal explanation.
Okay.
I'm not sure the Madam Leader of the Opposition, some direct questions for me and her. So, on a matter of personal explanation, Mr. Speaker, I also await the acting AG's comments. I almost felt as if I was back in history class back in the 80s. From the learning historian of the honorable member, governor, honorable member, female. Mr. Speaker, I am quite sure of what I said, and there was nothing that I was confused about. Mr. Speaker, what we are speaking to here, like I said, I started on a matter of democracy, Mr. Speaker. And when I look at the components of democracy, Mr. Speaker, it does not only pertain to the rule of law, Mr. Speaker. does not only pertain to the rule of law. There are other components and elements of democracy, such as justice and fairness, that goes with democracy. Mr. Speaker, I am well aware of our Constitution. I am well aware that even under the previous Constitution, the governor did not have to accept the advice of the persons who were supposed to give him advice under the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, just like under this Constitution, the governor does not have to accept the advice of cabinet. But if he does not accept the advice of cabinet, he can do so through direct instructions from the Secretary of State not to accept our advice, or he could deny or not accept the advice based on his perception of the violation of the governance principles. And that is in law. It's in the Constitution. But what I'm saying here is that not everything that is in law is fair and just. This very Constitution under which we are operating, Mr. Speaker, is one was not by the will of the people, Mr. Speaker. And I think that is a debate that will come very shortly. It's not for this time, Mr. Speaker. Because we are going to the debate of constitutional advancement. Not necessarily independence, but constitutional advancement. Because what we're talking about here is taxation without any representation, ignoring code, or blatantly ignoring the wishes of the people. How much louder do we have to speak, Mr. Speaker? I almost want to go on to say James Otis. Taxation or representation is tyranny. So we have a tyrant in our midst, Mr. Speaker. I rest my case, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Are there any other contributions? Are there any other? Okay, I recognize the honorable governance processes.
Mr. Speaker. My fellow tax and legal officers, I rise to make my contribution to the motion. If I say I am extremely proud of the program, I also deal with the opposition for recognizing and listening, joining hearts and hands in unity to fight when it comes to such an important, I don't know if I should refer to it as the last this repeal motion that was put forward by the Repeal administration. I rise to support this motion. Yes, I refer to VAT or VAT when you have a tax as the last system because it has the potential to wreck and to ruin not only what we have built in recent times, but more importantly, it has the potential to ruin what our forefathers have sweat and toiled to build many, many years ago. I oppose that you have a tax. I don't just simply oppose it for the sake of opposing. I oppose it for several reasons. First of all, if you can recall, value added tax was rushed into law by the activists on hearing the king who knew full well at that time that every tax and legal island objected to it.
and every businessman opposed it. Why such a rush? They rushed it because they knew elections would eventually come, and they knew an elected government, any elected government, PNP or PDM, would have not implemented. During the recent elections, we both campaigned and promised to do with protection changes that we will fight against value-added tax. That's exactly what I intend to do. I do not have a mandate for my people to support value-added tax, and I'm not afraid. So I cannot support it. And the opportunity comes, I will to repeal it. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at a crossroads. We have a choice. We can either go along with value-added tax, or we can fight against it. Today is a special day. Today is decision day. Today, this time, is the final moment. I believe that democracy is the most single powerful form of governance, and the voices of the people must be heard. Today we come united PMPs and PDMs. I never ever dreamed I would live to see this day. I am proud of Tucson Acres Island, and you should be too. I am proud to be explain to the world today that what unites us is stronger than what divides us. This is not about value-added tax alone. This is about having the courage to stand up and put our differences aside when we have to. This is maturity at its best. But let me also remind you that dictatorship is an autocratic form of governance, which the government is ruled by an individual, and in this case, a small group of persons, whose sole purpose is to take power away from the people and deprive them of their rights and freedoms. Mr. Speaker, the people of this country are against value-added tax, and yet the UK, through their agents here, see it fitting to force it on the people. Two parties coming together is undeniably a sign that indeed the total population is being represented today. And never in the history of mankind ever seen a situation the mother Britain that's gone against the express wishes of United Husband Family. After all, democracy was born in the UK. Mr. Speaker, if the Brits were to repeal or to veto this repeal, it will be us, and it will fly directly in the face of democracy. And the world will have no choice but to cry, shame on them. I want to take you up to ask ourselves, why do the Brits want to implement VAT? Is it really that they want a steady stream of revenue of about $10 million a year? Think about it, seriously. After all the negative reports from around the world about value-added tax, why do they still want to implement it? I am not convinced that it will do what it proves. After this administration provided alternatives that will generate more than $10 million a year, the Brits still insist on value-added tax, even though they have shown no evidence that value-added tax will generate what they project it will. That must be our cause of concern. I will tell you what I am convinced about. I am convinced that we are already among the highest tax countries in the region, or probably the world. And I do not think we have any flexibility or room for any additional taxes. I am convinced that value-added tax will kill consumer confidence and further out the economy. I am also convinced that value-added tax will deter investors other neighboring countries will capitalize on our stability by offering these very same investors concessions, opposed to suppressing them and punishing them for their investment in our country. I am also convinced that value-added tax will cost too much to implement, both for the government and also for the merchants. I am convinced that value-added tax will require heavy compliance, and that the government cannot effectively police it, and therefore lends itself to the establishment of heavy black market economy, whereby people will avoid providing direct invoices to pay less. So instead of generating more revenue, the government will collect less. In the United Kingdom, value-added tax costs £3.3 billion annually in fraud. These are decades. I am convinced that the TCI businesses are not ready for value-added tax because there are no laws that make it mandatory for merchants to do proper bookkeeping and accounting, and most local businessmen are not generating sufficient revenue to purchase software for the pay accountants to implement this venture. I am also convinced that those among us who are championing and promoting value-added tax are either misguided or simply do not understand the PCI economy, and therefore they are illustrating fiduciary and aptitude and cannot justifiably make the case for the implementation of value-added tax or any additional tax burden on our people. I am also convinced that there are two governments operating the tax level. I am convinced that there is one that is elected by and for the love of the people. But there seems to be also another one that is heavy-handed, elected by God knows who, and has no respect for the people of the taxpayers island. I view their role with regards to the introduction of value-added tax as interference in democracy, and therefore contrary to common practices. Once again, Mr. Speaker, I am convinced that value-added tax is not suitable for us, and I will vote to support this motion. Thank you very much.
I recognize the Honorable Minister for Health.
Honorable Speaker, colleagues, persons in the gallery, those listening by radio and streaming on the internet, a pleasant good afternoon. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of my honorable colleagues with respect to having value-added tax repealed. Mr. Speaker, over the past 3 years, the residents of the Turks and Caicos Islands have suffered much. Whilst we are thankful to God for keeping us, I must state that due measures implemented during the interim regime have made somewhat drastic, and to a certain extent very extreme. Mr. Speaker, we are aware that globally governments have been facing financial crisis. However, while other countries sought to invest in their country's development with a view to boost their economy, it would appear that the people of the Turks and Caicos Islands were punished. For example, Mr. Speaker, civil servants have received 10% reduction in salary, NHID contributions were increased, and the court duties were increased as well, just to name a few. Mr. Speaker, whilst my government is cognizant of the fact that governments earn money through fees and charges, we are also cognizant of the fact that the majority of the residents and the citizens of the Turks and Caicos Islands are relatively poor to middle class. Mr. Speaker, studies have shown that the value-added tax is regressive. Therefore, its burdens fall disproportionately on the poor as they are likely to spend more. Mr. Speaker's studies have also shown that value-added tax is rather difficult to administer. For the average business owner to now have to invest in software and equipment just to administer VAT is an additional cost, which business owners might not be able to acquire given the current state of TCIs in the economy. Mr. Speaker, like other neighboring countries, the Turks and Caicos Islands rely heavily on investment and tourism. Value-added tax is a deterrent to investors, and I believe that value-added tax will only try to further kill an almost stagnant economy. Mr. Speaker, it is evident that most of the business communities within the Turks and Caicos Islands use any opportunity to increase prices already. Mr. Speaker, value-added tax will further compound the situation. Mr. Speaker, a country like St. Kitts is the perfect example as to why we should not implement value-added tax. And Mr. Speaker, I also state that the Bahamas, who is more advanced or developed in certain aspects, has refused to implement value-added tax because of the negative effect it would have on investment and the people of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, we have all been elected by the people of the Turks and Caicos Islands as their voice. We are the watchmen. Therefore, we have assembled here today to ensure that the rights of our people are not trampled upon. And with this, Mr. Speaker, I join my colleagues today in support of having the value-added tax on repealed.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister for Health. Honorable Minister for Natural Resources. Sorry, yes, Mark, please.
Mr. Speaker, to excuse illegal behavior because it is supposed to be too expensive to counter is unconscionable. To excuse illegal behavior because it creates employment is inexcusable, and to excuse illegal behavior because some believe that it will bring additional revenue to the public treasury is simply inexcusable. These are the words of the former Prime Minister, Hubert A. Ingram of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, the implementation of value-added tax against the wishes of the people in the Turks and Caicos is illegal.
Hold on, honorable member. Let me remind members that to keep your telephones off when speaking is distracting to speakers.
I believe, Mr. Speaker, that democracy is a government by the people, the rule of the majority, and the people's way of voicing their rights in this country. Mr. Speaker, while people talk and preach about democracy and reform of government, again we see today that good people, 15 of us, elected by the people of the Turks and Caicos Islands, continue to be ignored, dictated to in the governance of this country. And so, the only and the biggest thing I want to contribute to this debate is that even in this new era, we continue to see games being played in the future direction of this country. And as an advocate for humanity, I cannot and will not support an act, ordinance, or regulation that can possibly present hardship to especially small business owners and citizens of these islands. Mr. Speaker, in representing the people of this country, I have taken a personal note to believe that the voice of the people is the voice of the government, and we should not impose or try to enforce in this country methods not suited for these our beautiful by nature Turks and Caicos Islands. Democracy must prevail. Today, we must vote yes to the repeal of the bill or the motion presented here today. Today, we must be the voice of our people and vote yes to representation. Today, we must vote yes to true and real democracy. Today, we must vote yes to preserve our rights. Mr. Speaker, I take note of the two government-appointed members have already spoken. One asking us to take a second look and delay, and the other inferring misrepresentation on behalf of the Premier and the powers of the governor. Well, I want to go on record as saying that the ultimate power lies with the people of this country, and they exercise their democratic right by voting on November 9, 2012. And because of this, we are here today to represent them. Mr. Speaker, democracy is at stake, and we must not forget that. I commend all of us standing together in the united front. As I review the relevant documents presented, one of the experts considered is that the implementation of VAT in his report, that there are still numerous problems, areas in this value-added tax. All of which he says has to be dealt with a properly functioning value-added tax system. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask this question. Are we the guinea pigs in this venture? Mr. Speaker, we are not prepared for this new implementation. We are not prepared as a country on how that works. The risk associated with such implementation is detrimental. Or how will it result in loss of funding required for necessary resources, especially to protect our coastal environment and the protection of our region. We are not prepared to be sidelined in keeping such a bill that cannot guarantee that the success of such a measure is beneficial based on incorrect. We are not prepared for such intimidation as the enactment of VAT proposed to do. Mr. Speaker, I support this motion of the Value-Added Tax Repeal Bill 2013.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. Honourable Attorney General Acting. Sorry, you got my eyes first.
Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise to provide the advice sought by a member of this House and in fulfillment of my duty as the legal advisor to the House of Assembly. Mr. Speaker, before I provide that advice, I would like to just clarify that it is not for the members of this honorable House to question whether they have a right to have an active and spirited, robust debate on issues that concern these islands. It is their duty to do so. And in relation to that, the Attorney General has recently released a press statement concerning the level of debate in these islands on important issues. And I commend members, Mr. Speaker, for the high level of civility that has been shown in relation to a controversial issue in the debate today, without resorting to personal attacks, which only lower the level of conversation and diminish all of us. And so, Mr. Speaker, not for the benefit of members in the House, who I know understand these principles, but for the benefit of persons in the public who are listening, I would wish to say that my role here is as legal advisor to this honorable House, and in respect of it, in relation to all public officers like myself, the role that we perform is without fear of favor and without political, bias. We are here to do our jobs, and we do it to the best of our ability. And so in relation to that, the comments that I will provide Mr. Speaker, is in the context of those statements. Mr. Speaker, the honorable member has asked for an explanation or legal advice in respect of the progress of this the repeal bill, which is intended to be raised in time, and the legal requirements as well as the challenges that will be faced as a result of the repeal of the value added tax ordinance. And so, Mr. Speaker, I will address the concerns raised by the member in relation to the Constitution, which is what governs all of us as members have indicated earlier today. Mr. Speaker, subject to Section 73 of the Constitution, the power to make laws in these islands under the 2011 Constitution lies with this legislature, Mr. Speaker, under Section 62 of the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, by virtue of Section 71 of the Constitution, any member may introduce any bill to the House of Assembly for debate and in accordance with the standing orders. Mr. Speaker, under the said Section 71, that includes a bill which seeks to reduce any tax. Mr. Speaker, under Section 71, the governor will then consider the bill. Section 73 provides, Mr. Speaker, that a bill passed by the House of Assembly shall not be law until it has been assented, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, in relation to the assent to bill sent to him, the governor has three options. The governor, when presented with a bill, can assent to that bill, or he can refuse to assent to that bill, or he can reserve the bill, Mr. Speaker, for Her Majesty's signification. Mr. Speaker, in the Constitution, these are so-called reserved powers, which Her Majesty the Queen has reserved unto herself, exercised through her governor or through her Secretary of State. That is the reality of our constitutional arrangements, Mr. Speaker. Unless instructed by the Secretary of State, Mr. Speaker, the governor must reserve any bill for Her Majesty's signification, which appears to him, acting in his discretion, to be repugnant to or inconsistent with the Constitution, to be inconsistent with the statement of governance principles applicable at that time, to be inconsistent with any international obligations, Mr. Speaker, to affect any matter for which the governor has special responsibility, to affect the integrity or independence of the public service, the administration of justice, or any institution protecting good governance. Mr. Speaker, or to determine or regulate the privileges, immunities, and powers of this very House of Assembly or its members. Mr. Speaker, while the legal hurdles are obvious and are wholly recited here for the benefit of the public, the value-added tax ordinance, though passed into law, is not yet brought into force. Such challenges that do exist are merely practical, or I should say many. Those challenges, I can sample three challenges which immediately come to mind. One is, the government needs to ensure, it is the government's duty to ensure, that there is an adequate revenue stream to run the government. That is a matter for cabinet to work through, with the assistance of the members of this honorable House, where their legislative change is required. Additionally, the other practical challenge that I can see, Mr. Speaker, is that of repurposing the staff which have already been hired, specifically for the purpose of implementing the VAT and the associated costs that flow from that. And finally, Mr. Speaker, the additional practical challenge that I see is the cost of abandoning the contracts which have already been concluded in respect of the preparation for the value-added tax. Mr. Speaker, if I could be of any further assistance, I'm happy to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Attorney General statement of government principles, but I take it that is not relevant at this stage because they have not yet been agreed to.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for your question. I have indicated that the statement of governance principles that is relevant, that's in force at the time. So the statement of governance principles previously issued has expired once the 2011 Constitution was brought into force. The process for the conclusion of a new statement of governance principles is in training, and I believe that the draft statement is now with the leader of the opposition for her comment before being brought to this honorable house for debate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. It's about 5 minutes to 1. We can entertain another contribution if it's going to be brief. Otherwise, it makes sense to go to return at 2. I don't know what's the feeling of the House. Right, this, our last stands suspended until